and go.
So I'm sorry about that. My name is Wilmer Fernandez. I'm a board member of the chapter. I also the chair for one of the projects. This project we call the Migration Partners Project. The Audubon chapter of Minneapolis has this project as a way to fulfill one of our missions. You know, that is to make it every effort to work toward conservation of bird habitats. So understanding that, we have partnered with the Honduran ornithology group in Honduras to promote conservation there, and also trying to understand, um, the role that different habitats plays on some of the migratory species that we see here when they're wintering ground set in Honduras. So to that extent, we have invited Fabiola Rodríguez-Vásquez. She's a biologist from Honduras. She's working on her PhD at Tulane University. And I'm very pleased that you accepted our invitation, Fabiola. Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for attending. Fabiola, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much to the Audubon chapter of Minneapolis, and thank you to the participants that are here interested in this topic. I will, in this presentation, I wanted to share with you a series of things. The topic being that birds and bird research and bird conservation that occurs in a one region or one location can have implications and connect globally if we think about scaling up and if we give them the opportunity and we give them that support. So I am going to talk about migratory birds, and migratory birds are fascinating to me. So one of the reasons why they're fascinating is because they have evolved to have this behavior of a full annual cycle that takes them across borders. And this annual cycle, it is represented in different geographies, like a phase in the breeding region, a phase in the non-breeding region, which includes different countries in the Caribbean, Mesoamerica, and South America, and the migration that connects these two geographies that occurs in the fall and in spring. So another reason why I'm interested in migratory birds is because studying the ecology of migratory birds is fascinating, and we need to do it. I don't know how many of you are aware of this group known as the Midwest Migration Network, which is a collective of scientists, people that work in government, and conservationists that come together to identify pressing questions that we need to know for the conservation of these migratory birds, which include where do birds that breed here go? So connectivity, we call that connectivity. Or where in that full annual cycle are the birds sensing or receiving more stresses from different threats. And we know that migratory birds are declining. This isn't news at this point, I don't think. And so these questions become even more pressing. Where are the threats more pressing? Or how do these threats act? Is it acting on the mortality of the birds directly, or is it affecting other metrics of the birds or other activities that the birds conduct? So let's think about the question of where is it that the stresses to the population or the threats could be most pressing. Could it be in the breeding grounds? Could it be in the wintering grounds? Or is it in between? So to think about this, the reality is that scientists up to this point don't really know where that occurs. And knowing this means that we should know it for every single bird that is experiencing a decline. But scientists have begun to understand or to tackle this question. Doctors Bridget Stutchbury at York University in Canada and Kaz Taylor, my current advisor at Tulane University, started doing this for the wood thrush by joining data from geolocators, which are tracking devices that allow us to know where the birds go if we if we track them from the breeding to the non-breeding. And with the use of mathematical models and identifying what would happen if we lose habitat in the breeding and in the non-breeding as continues to go, so business as usual, where could we see more of a decline? And these models suggested that habitat loss in both regions is negative. Clearly, it would have negative impacts on the population decline. But the habitat loss in the non-breeding regions for a species like the wood thrush, especially in the part of the non-breeding that encompasses the countries of Nicaragua, parts of Honduras, would have a negative influence in this population decline. So to me, that was a very intriguing point, being from Honduras and already sharing with you why I enjoy working with migratory birds, that maybe I could do a PhD program that could contribute a little bit to the knowledge and hopefully how to inform the conservation of these species. So I landed on this question, which is a little bit broad. If the non-breeding grounds are a limiting phase of the annual life cycle for migratory birds, how does this limitation act? And the starting point of any research or of any project is first compiling what we do know and go from there. So there are three main things that I think I knew about, and we're going to talk a little bit about each of those. So first, we knew that among migratory bird threats, habitat loss is one of those threats. We also know that migratory birds use agricultural lands, and there is a link between habitat loss and agricultural or working lands. And three, we need to know how the birds are doing in these lands, even if we know that they're using these lands. So in this presentation, we're going to focus on habitat loss that occurs in forested habitats, because we have migratory birds that use prairies and savannas and dry forests, and we have migratory birds that use coastal lands and wetlands. But in this presentation, we're going to focus on montane forests. And the conversion of a natural forest is driven many times in places like Honduras and its neighboring countries by agricultural activities. So it can be converted, forests can be converted for coffee production. It can be converted for cattle pasture land, and it can be converted for more industrial agriculture. This is an example of pineapple production. All of these examples are from Honduras specifically. In this talk, we're going to focus on the links between this habitat loss and the production of coffee. So my PhD work, most of it is conducted in Honduras in a working landscape, in the working landscape of the mountains of Yoro, the department of Yoro. And a working landscape can be called a socio-ecological system because we have different elements all converging and all interacting in one place. We have the natural system, the forest, the biodiversity, the migratory birds. We have peoples, which are the users of this landscape, as well as biodiversity is also a user of this landscape. And then we have the product, because we call it a working landscape because the land is being worked for a product. And even though all of these elements are interacting, it seems like the product is what's really driving what happens in this habitat. You know, coffee production in these communities where I work with, it drives job opportunities, the local economy. At a larger scale, it drives the country's economy. So then coffee has an impact in many other things, including people and the habitat. And for that reason, we're going to take a first and a very quick look at the coffee production chain. Because if you're a coffee drinker like me, then you may want to know or better understand where are those links in that coffee production chain that could be having an impact on loss of habitat and thus migratory birds. So starting at the left top corner, you see a map where coffee is being produced. And Honduras is one of these countries, and it's a top exporter. It's one of our, if not the first exporting product we have. To be able to be competitive, we have to think in amounts of export. And so a very common type of farm to produce coffee is the sun coffee farm, where, as you can see in the image below the map, it's a monoculture where you only have the coffee plants. And I have signaled with an arrow here to the chain that first link of the production where already things could be done better. So this is one of the first instances in which forest or natural elements of the habitat have been transformed to just have a coffee monoculture. Once the coffee is grown, the bean is picked and it's processed, and then that bean needs to be dried before its export. And there are many ways to dry coffee. One of those ways is a natural way in which it's just laid out in these terraces of concrete, and then we let the elements do their job. But if we're thinking about large amounts of coffee to export, that's not effective or efficient to do. So in Honduras, people use dryers that use wood, and this wood has to come from forest. So here I have signaled that second arrow in the production chain where we lose forest for coffee purposes. And if in the world we have an estimate of around 2 billion cups of coffee, that we have per day, and we scale this up, we see that this isn't sustainable. And this brings me to the second part and why it is important for us to understand how the working lands operate, is because migratory birds are using the working lands as well. They're not just using conserved areas. And we know that in these lands, habitat can be lost due to the conversion of forest to a monoculture, or for the drying of the coffee. Now, I work in this initiative known as the Yoro initiative, that is originated by the Mesoamerican Development Institute, an organization that for 10 years plus has been working in this region in Yoro, thinking about how to modify the two links. So it starts with actionable ideas of how can we improve this production chain for coffee. Of course, nothing can be accomplished without the participation of the producers that have worked in this initiative as well. And to tackle this, remember the two main elements that could be improved upon are the way that we grow coffee and the way that we dry the coffee. So MDI has worked by promoting an alternative type of farm, which instead of just having the sun coffee farm with no surrounding habitat, or just a shade coffee farm, which shade coffee farms are also an alternative to sun coffee, MDI proposes a third alternative, which is the IOC farm, which uses a method in which forest is spared next or around the coffee farm in a 1-to-1 ratio. And up to this point, there are 20 enrolled farms in the Yoro region that are protecting up to 177 hectares of forest. And all of this is outside protected areas. The second part of the production chain that MDI has worked to improve is how we dry the coffee. So in the Yoro region, there is a plant that has been installed that instead of using fuel wood to dry the coffee, means that all of this coffee that comes from these IOC farms can be dried in a plant where the energy is solar energy and biofuels. And then we can imagine a production chain that is tweaked so that there is still, a capacity for a market and an economy, but more sustainable for the biodiversity and for the people, since the forest also provides basic needs ecosystem services for the people, such as water. And the idea is that the 20 farms can someday become more than 20 farms and, connect the actual protected areas and make what's outside the protected areas into more forest. Now, we do know that migratory birds use these agricultural landscapes. Most of the research that has been done on migratory birds, which thankfully we have a good foundation, thanks to researchers in many other Latin American countries from Mexico, Costa Rica, Colombia. But a lot of this research has occurred in shade coffee farms. So we do know about some of the benefits of these farms. For example, and just as a recap, because I know I really went through that very quickly, I think you're familiar, but a shade coffee farm has the coffee plants and then just trees that act as the shade. So it's more complex and it allows for, for more biodiversity to be present compared to a sun coffee farm, just by conserving that tree element. And researchers in Colombia found that migratory birds that overwintered in shade coffee farms could see an improvement in their body condition. The body condition is an index that scientists use where they use the bird's weight, the deposition of fat, the presence of muscle, to be able to use it as an approximate of the fitness of the bird, especially because maybe it's difficult to study birds and to track every single individual. So we have to fall back on things that are approximates. And some of the species that saw improvements in these shade coffee farms were the ones I am showing you here. But what I liked about the study is that it also showed that it happened with multiple species, and it showed that for some species there was no change. So they didn't improve, but they didn't, they didn't decrease in their body condition. And so it means that one shoe size doesn't fit everyone, in terms of a conservation of migrants. And this is why it's important for us to still collect some information per species. The second thing we know then is, thanks to research conducted also in Colombia and in Nicaragua, is that migratory birds that spend time in the shade coffee farms tend to prefer certain shade trees, because these trees can be food resources by hosting insects or fruits. So I like this research because it went a little bit further in the sense that not only do we know that they improve it, but we know how it could be doing it. And then we can study this and make it into a management action of which are the tree species that could be good for the producer, but also for the birds. But it's not all perfect. And in our study region in Yoro, Dr. David King and Brett Bailey found that the wood thrush, although the wood thrush was using shade coffee farms, they weren't persisting in these shade coffee farms, meaning that they were being more nomadic. And in non-breeding migratory bird ecology, a behavior such as this one is sometimes thought to be like a strategy that the bird takes to be able to make ends meet. And holding a territory tends to be considered the better route. So wood thrush in the Yoro region are more nomadic, and they found that there was a negative link or association between the shaded coffee farms and the wood thrush overwintering survival. And to me, that, well, not great news, but it was interesting in the sense that I wanted to understand why is it that we see positive effects in one place and negative effects in other. And this is kind of how I finally arrived to what I'm doing in my project. But not without saying first that I hope that with this, you can now see, or I could highlight, that it is important for us to think about conservation in private lands and in working landscapes, because we will not be able to depend only on protected areas for the conservation of biodiversity. So through all of this information, I conducted a study for 2 years, for 2 wintering seasons. So from November to March in the years 2018 and 2019, and 2019 to 2020, just before the pandemic unleashed entirely. And we lived in this Yoro region. This is a picture of our housing scenario. And I like this picture because it shows you what a working landscape looks like in this area. So working landscape in Yoro includes, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it includes the sun coffee that is very young, which is, it's completely like under the sun. Then you can see to its left this area, brushy area that looks like fallow lands. Then we have in the background some shade coffee. What we don't see in the picture is that there's a forest on the right that's next to the shade coffee farm. This is an IOC farm. And so we see that this is a very diverse landscape in terms of the habitats that we have. And also these are not large farms. You know, an average farm size in this region is about 6 hectares. I was lucky to have a good team, collaborators and recent graduates from the biology program in Honduras and members of the community of Yoro, whom helped us with the research as well as the logistics, and of course the producers that allow us to work in their properties. So in this region, we worked in 20 different sites, and I decided to narrow the study to 2 bird species. I like the idea of understanding beyond just one species, but there are certain capacity or certain limitations that you have moving around in these montane regions and how much you can do. So we decided to pick the wood thrush because it's a species of conservation concern, and there is a good amount of already existing literature on this species, including the one from our collaborators, Dr. Dave King and Brett Bailey. Then I selected the Wilson's warbler, which even if there's a higher population of Wilson's warbler, they're still in decline. And it's a species that we frequently see. So that's easier in terms of knowing that we would have a good sample of these 2 birds. In the field, we used mist netting techniques to be able to study the birds up close. So, you know, from the left to the right, on the left, we would arrive to our coffee farm and use naturally occurring lanes. Don't think we go hacking some producers, you know, coffee plants or other vegetation. Then we place these mist nets, and if you are not familiar with a mist net, it's like a big volleyball of a soft mesh that just captures the birds as they go through their natural corridors flying. When you have to have training to use this technique, and you know, you have to follow protocols too. So once we caught the birds and we extracted them and studied them, we used an aluminum band to be able to identify it. And for migratory birds, this means that if somebody else catches that bird, they would be able to also obtain this information. So it can help others. We collected information on the birds itself, like their weight or their age, hinting at the right that that is not a migratory bird. I think some of you recognize it, it's a Lesson's mudmut. And then with all of this information, I derived performance metrics. I am using this term I see more and more in scientific papers of metrics that allow us to understand if a bird is doing well in a habitat or if it isn't. And we also know that it's best to use more than one point of evidence so that we can use comprehensively these different metrics and understand how the birds are doing. So I am deriving a body condition index, like I mentioned before, age and sex ratios. And this is important because it's important to know what members of the population are overwintering in a place. So think about it this way. If we don't know where females versus males overwinter, and it just so happens that maybe the females are in a habitat that's very different to the ones that the males use, but we don't know about it because maybe females are more cryptic, and that habitat happens to be more threatened, then that is an issue we will have when we have to counter those population declines. So understanding who's present is important. And same thing goes for juvenile. So every member of the population, adult, juvenile, male, female, has a role, and it's important for us to know. We also conducted an experiment to assess the persistence and survival for Wilson's warbler, similar to what our collaborators did for the wood thrush. And we did some counts to obtain some indices of abundance across the different coffee farms in which we worked. And now, what did we do or what did our sites look like? So my interest is seeing how the birds are doing in this landscape. And to do that, I thought about evaluating these performance metrics at the farm scale, meaning if a farm is a sun coffee farm or a shade coffee farm or an IOC farm, do the birds' performance metrics vary? Or so if and how they vary, do they? And at this level, even though it's easy to say this is a sun coffee farm, this is a shade coffee farm, the reality is that no two farms are the same. So we decided to measure some vegetation characteristics and to better understand how these farms are composed. But I am also interested, and this is how I am furthering a little bit the knowledge, in what's around the farm. Knowing that these farms are different and knowing that the wood thrush and other migratories don't stay in a farm and that these farms are small, I want to know if what's around the farm could influence these performance metrics. And for that, we're conducting a classification using satellite images to come up with maps that look like this, that then allow us to quantify how much of it is forest, how much of it is sun coffee, shade coffee, and other habitat types. And we can do this at different extents. So at 250-meter radius around the coffee farm, 500 or 1,000. Okay, so what have we found so far? It's all very exciting, but I'm still analyzing the data. So I can only bring you a very small amount of the preliminary results. And hopefully we can catch up on some point later on where I can give you some of the real and final results. But here's what we have learned. So in terms of the farm, we already had this notion that, well, these two farms aren't the same, but at the same time, it's easy for us to say that this is a sun, this is a shade, this is IOC. So indeed, by collecting all of these different vegetation structural metrics, we did confirm, and pooling all these variables, that there is a gradient. So, you have something very simple like the sun coffee farm, a little bit more complex with the shade, and then more complex with the IOC farm that actually has the forest, let's just say the forest. But the producers really have a say in how each farm looks. And between the IOC farms and the shade coffee farms, there are other elements that could be important ecologically for the bird that don't follow a gradient. Some coffee farms, like the shade and some IOC farms, have more leaf litter dominance, but other coffee farms, even if they're shade, they're more forb dominant. I imagine a bird like the wood thrush that does spend time in that leaf litter, one thing could influence it more than the other. And similar within shade coffee farms. Within shade coffee farms, we have farms where there is a presence of larger trees. This isn't a shade farm, but I just wanted to show you that we have larger or older trees versus a shade coffee farm where the trees are younger and are at that stage where they're not big old trees. And this, this stage of trees can also mean something ecologically. So we need to think about that. In terms of the birds, we have documented at least 30 species of migratory birds using the working landscape of Yoro. And here's what we have found with our 2 species of interest so far. So far, very interestingly, most of the birds that we caught in these 2 seasons were juveniles and males. Now, for the sex ratios, we only have data for 1 year. So we had to collect feathers and send them to a laboratory for genetic testing, because a bird like the wood thrush, you can't sex it in the hand. You have to send the feather and then get that result. So, but we do know that, and we quantified this with models, that if you catch a wood thrush, there's over a 50% probability that that individual is a juvenile. And for the Wilson's warbler, there is over a 60% probability that that Wilson's warbler is a juvenile or it's a male. And even if you'd think that we could sex the Wilson's warbler in the hand, I am glad we sent feathers, because every single Wilson warbler we identified as a female was actually a young male. And the 9 only female Wilson's warblers that we caught from a sample of 50, they all had a complete or an almost complete black cap, which means that you can easily think that they were males, but in reality, they were females. So that's interesting still because we don't know where those females are or where the adults are. In terms of the body condition, we found that there is some variation, meaning there are individuals on the lower end of their scaled body mass, and there are individuals that are doing better. But the farm type isn't defining this, meaning that between the IOC and the shade, they're not, one is not doing better or worse than the other. We're also using other body condition metrics, such as just feeling the muscle and counting the score of the fat. And for the Wilson's warbler, most of the individuals were usually at the lower end of the scoring system. So I don't think even with the landscape characteristics, we may find something, but the wood thrush did have a wider range. So some individuals doing not so well, or in the lower end, and some individuals doing in the higher end. So this is inconclusive, and we will see if, the landscape metrics better predict this variation. So at the farm scale, what we know up to this point is that, coffee farms, they can represent a gradient or a succession from simple to complex, except for those vegetation structure characteristics that are specifically managed by the producer. That in the Yoro working landscape, it seems that we have mostly juveniles or mostly males, and that body condition up to now was not explained by the farm scale characteristics. So how does this, I talked to you about the initiative of the Yoro model and, about this local research. So how does this tie to the local conservation efforts of MDI and the Yoro initiative? Well, working with MDI for me and for other Honduran biologists has been an opportunity because I don't work with people that are only working with migratory birds. Along with these researchers and collaborators here in the United States from different universities, we have identified two broad research questions that can be thought of as a two-way street. One is, how does the Yoro working landscape sustain biodiversity? And the second one is the other way around. How does the biodiversity contribute to the working landscape? So how does conserving forest in IOC farms could help a producer? The research that I talked to you about fits in the first question, like how is the landscape sustaining biodiversity? And we need to know if it does work. Like if we're thinking and envisioning that something like the Yoro model is going to be scaled up, then we need to understand if it will make a difference for the migratory birds and biodiversity, and if not, how can we improve it so that it does? So I just wanted to share very briefly other interesting research that has taken place in the working landscape by my collaborators. So my collaborators have conducted baseline research to understand the species richness and diversity of things from butterflies, also water quality, or bats and mice and birds, but considering also resident birds. And for instance, it seems like for the mice, it's not like a high species count as it is for the birds, but it certainly is characterizing what we do have. For bats, my colleague Farlam definitely, he found that the species richness got higher following the gradient, as would be as he was expecting or predicting, and as other research has suggested. For the birds, total, plus the migratory birds, it's a total of 115 species. And the resident birds that through their natural history we know prefer forest were being sustained in these IOC farm patches. I have to say that forest patches in this area are very scarce alone, but there are a few forest patches that are, bigger compared to, the forest that we would find in these IOC patches, which, like I mentioned, the mean is like six hectares. Okay, and here's something else I wanted to share with you. This research matches or supports other research that has already been conducted in Costa Rica. In Costa Rica, researchers studied IOC systems of coffee as well, close to the Monteverde Reserve. And their interest was, okay, so what is that point in the size of the IOC farm in which we can see that the species richness is influenced? Because we do see that it is, but we need to start thinking, how is it that we can improve it? And what these researchers found is that from the samples that they have of all of their different IOC farms, which were from maybe 1 hectare to plus 20, that as little as 2.5 can be that breaking point to increase a species richness present in a farm. Under that, maybe it's just not more ambiguous. So this is something, or this is where research eventually needs to lead, to be helpful so that we can improve the habitat. So with this small section, what I want you to take is that field research is still important, and we need to support conservation initiatives, but also field research that allows us to understand what's going on in the field and improve upon the conservation initiatives. They're important and they connect to conservation because they allow us to know what is there. They allow us to understand if biodiversity is sustained adequately, and they allow us to generate next steps on how to sustain biodiversity adequately if we find, negative results, for example. Now, how does this tie globally? Because this is a very localized research. I mentioned that it was only 20 farms. I understand that there is not a direct tie, like these 20 farms are not going to maybe save the whole population decline, but the key lies in the vision and in the support of these initiatives. So research that is taking place in this one location in Honduras, and Honduras being in the Mesoamerican biodiversity hotspot, and initiatives that want to expand on forest have two benefits. So if an initiative that seeks to expand forest can increase areas that act as carbon sequesters. So an IOC system, for example, if forest is protected, then you have these carbon sequestration lands. But if we increase habitat, and not just in coffee, think of an IOC system maybe in other types of crops, then we also secure more habitat for the species richness and for the migratory birds. So local landscapes have a link to global conservation because they can be a route to sustain and expand forests to sequester carbon, and they can be the route to expand habitat for migratory birds and biodiversity. So with all of this, I think we're going to segue into what is it that we can all do to help initiatives like this one. I have to say that by being in the Audubon chapter, you're already helping because you like birds and you think about their conservation, and this chapter has initiatives that help conservation and research. So I'm going to mention just some things that you already may be all familiar with. One of the things that one can do is contribute to local organizations. Small donations can go a long way. Like Wilmer mentioned, Dr. Oliver Comer is the president of the Honduran Ornithological Association. I'm also a member of this Honduran Ornithological Association. And I'm using this as an example, but it can be an organization elsewhere that you have visited and you want to support. But there's oftentimes programs like these flagship programs for which you can make a contribution to aid in something different. So, for example, ASHO's flagship programs include workshops to increase bird awareness in schools, or 2 is a program to explore underexplored or underbirded sites in Honduras, where we need to know what is the current bird community or bird species richness. 3 is a program to help with environmental issues such as trafficking of birds, and 4 is a small grant program that helps with research for young biologists or ecologists in Honduras, which is something very important to me because I think that There's much room to grow, and there's lots and lots of desire to do the research. But you can also do something else on the sustainability front, and that is to live bird friendly. So I don't know if you're aware, but the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center started this initiative last year, known as the Bird Friendly Coalition. It has up to 50 members, also of different kinds, academic institutions, government agencies, organizations, and conservationists. And the goal is to make these sustainable products, not only coffee, but it could be cacao or maybe even buildings, front and center, so that us as consumers can make informed decisions and support these sustainable products that do conserve or promote the conservation of birds. So as an example, I learned only recently that there is something such as, sustainable beef or grazed on Audubon certified bird-friendly land. So that's the notion behind the Bird Friendly Coalition, to be able to, bring everything so that the information is easily found by a consumer. So in summary, research on migratory birds, even if it's local, can have implications for global knowledge. And we can all do something or do more, or share to others what they can do to aid conservation initiatives. So I really want to thank everyone for sticking out till the end of this presentation. And this is my contact information if you want to establish a contact or ask a question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Fabiola, for this presentation. And, Audubon chapter of Minneapolis, recognize this dependency, right, that we all have, that we all share. And that's, the main reason we establish this partnership with the Honduran Ornithology Group, with the purpose of, reaching out to, birders, reaching out to people who are in the ecotourism, people who are, involved on the tourism of bird watching, but also researchers too. And we also try to highlight, all the research that is happening in places like Honduras, because here we keep hearing the bad news, about countries like Honduras, but there is so much work happening there even today, despite all the problems that the country is having. So thank you, Fabiola, for that great presentation. And I think we have a couple of questions. I don't know if, let me see.
We do. Wilmer, would you like to read the questions, or would you like me to work through them?
Yeah, if you can work through them, that would be great.
Of course. So Luis is saying, hi, Fabiola, how do the MDI encourage agricultures to implement IOC in these sites?
Thank you so much, Luis, for that question, because it was something I was supposed to mention but did not mention. So the incentive, this is all voluntary, but within this initiative, which is very comprehensive, one of the incentives is that the coffee that comes from the IOC farm that is then dried in the solar hybrid dryer enters and is sold in its own brand known as Café Solar. And Café Solar has a stable price of coffee compared to the other coffee farms. You can actually, if you are in the United States, you can purchase Café Solar by visiting cafesolar.com or .org. And it's coffee that comes from its farm. So that's one, that stable price. The second is that MDI has initiated a process to be able to enter a more stable carbon credit program. They have successfully done some sales because I'm not really familiar with how carbon sales work, but as I understand it, you know, many big companies around the globe, if they want to like reduce their carbon footprint, they can just go into a place and just like purchase certain carbon stocks for areas that are conserved, like these ones. But the notion and the idea is that this can be all documented so that it can be something more ongoing, so that that is an incentive for the producer to not convert it back to coffee or to just, you know, leave the program. So that's the incentive.
Thank you. The next question is in regard to the mist netting. And the question is asking if young birds are more likely to be caught in the nets, if you're seeing that in the data because they're sort of new to the world and inexperienced and are not wise to the ways of the scientists.
I really wonder about this. This is something I wonder about a lot. And I have talked to many ornithologists every time I go to a congress and I have an opportunity to talk to people that are working on the ground like me with migratory birds, people I admire. And some people, what they have found when they have even longer term studies, for example, is that this can fluctuate, that you could actually see a flip. And it has to do with, well, you know, maybe 1 year in your region, if all of these birds are coming from the same population in the breeding grounds, maybe that year wasn't as good for young birds. And so you're gonna see a different population, more of adults. So on that sense, you can see places where there's more dominance of adults, even if it is like a year or two. And then I've had other colleagues that said, in my experience, what you're catching is what you're getting. So you are right in the sense that it's something I consider every time. And I do have access. So part of my research, or part of another part of my PhD, is to analyze existing data from long-term mist netting programs in different locations across the wintering range. And just to give you a little bit, one of the things I'm exploring is if there is a concentration of juveniles in a particular latitude, because there is a hypothesis that indicates that females tend to go further south. The hypothesis is that males are further north a little bit so that they can arrive to the breeding grounds. And in the same literature, you find that juveniles winter further south. And I did a first exploration with some species, including the Wilson's warbler, and I'm also finding this relationship that juveniles are a little bit further south. But we don't really know yet what's teasing us apart. So that leads me also to believe that maybe what we're seeing is those members of the population that are juveniles. But yeah, I cannot really ascertain it.
Lots of factors to consider, and that's part of why we love the science so much, is that there's always questions and new hypotheses to explore. The next question, they start out by indicating that they had heard that coffee markets were down, just generally speaking, I think, and then wondering what is happening to the farms that they're going out of production.
Oh, interesting. So I wonder if this is, I have to say that I don't know if I am aware of this lately. I do know that the pandemic may have a big consequence, because this is the type of work that occurs in these coffee farms, especially in Honduras. People are the ones that go pick up the coffee, you know, and so I don't know if the pandemic maybe is going to have an influence, but no, I don't have information on how down or how bad the market is as of today.
Very good. Others are just sharing their gratitude for the presentation that you gave tonight. Very informative, just lots of really wonderful feedback, and thanking you for all the work that you are doing.
Thank you everyone. I really appreciate that you were interested in this topic and that you came.
Thank you. Let's see, I'm going to go ahead and, if it's all right with you, to change to share my screen. There was a few
Yes.
upcoming event
Let me
announcements.
stop this. Yes.
Sure. Okay, one moment. There are a few dates that our chair asked us to make an announcement for. Okay, so our upcoming board meeting that is open to the public, anyone can join us virtually, contacting Keith, either on the phone number on the screen or via email to request the Zoom access. So that will be on Monday, January 25th at 7 p.m. And it's non-participatory, just coming to observe and see what it is we are focusing on. It's a great opportunity to get a sense for all the different elements that make up our chapter, the kinds of work that we're doing, and the accomplishments that we're able to kind of share with one another, since we have a variety of different teams working on different initiatives that make up kind of this amazing mosaic of bird conservation at all different levels within the community and within habitats. And so lots of good things happening that you can learn about during the board meeting. The next advocacy committee meeting, also virtual of course, is on Wednesday, January 20th at 2 p.m. And we have Connie and Steve are the two emails on the screen that you can reach out to. If you're interested in attending the meeting, don't have to participate right away if you don't want to. If you just want to come and get a sense for what the advocacy committee is all about, what they're working on, and if there are opportunities for you to get in there and get involved and support the work they are doing. Our community engagement committee is all about volunteers getting involved in different aspects of bird conservation and education and community engagement, not just in Minneapolis, but in quite a large swath. We do quite a bit. So everything from doing habitat service projects to getting out and doing some socially distant birding and getting to know who is out there in our winter landscapes, and then also doing educational programming for the community. Lots of very cool things happening. We are meeting virtually on Sunday, January 17th at 2:30 p.m. You can reach me at the email provided on the screen. If you would like that access information and just want to come and see what we're all about, or just dive in head first, which we absolutely love. Migration Partners will be announcing when their next meeting is happening. If you have questions about that, if you'd like to learn more about it, you can certainly go to the Audubon chapter of Minneapolis website. So we do have a subpage on that particular program, or you can reach out to Wilmer directly through the email listed on the screen here. And our next program, we're working on finalizing the presenter for our February program. So keep an eye on our website. If you're signed up for our emails, you'll get the notification when that happens. And of course, we will post it and promote it through Facebook and our social media communications. And as always, stay in touch and get out and enjoy the birds with every moment that you can. They're pretty special. And as Keith mentioned at the beginning of our program, birds really do connect us all. Thank you and good night.
Thank you. Thank you, Fabiola. Thank you, everybody who joined.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Have a good night.